Memphis, the Blue Note Club, August 17th, 1963, 10:45 p.m. One of the bulbs at the edge of the stage kept flickering. That's how it goes in joints with old wiring. Nobody ever bothers fixing it because that trembling light adds something to the spirit of the night. Chuck Berry had just rolled into his third song, and a bead of sweat slid down his forehead and landed on the neck of his guitar, catching a tiny glint under the spotlight. I was behind the bar, pulling my third shift that evening, my feet aching something fierce, but I couldn't take my eyes off the stage. Because after years of working the Blue Note, I'd learned one thing. Some nights just pass you by, and some nights there's something hanging in the air. That night, there was something hanging in the air. The club was packed wall to wall, but one guy in the crowd kept catching my attention, mid-20s, faded blue shirt, worn-out jeans. He was holding a beer, but not drinking it, just holding it, his fingers tapping rhythm on the bottle, his lips silently mouthing every word Chuck sang. I knew that look. It was the look of someone in love with music, someone who wanted to be on that stage but never had the nerve. I'd seen it 100 times before, but this time something was different. There wasn't just admiration in his eyes. There was a decision. When Chuck finished Roll Over Beethoven, the crowd went wild. Whistles, applause, feet stomping on the wooden floor like thunder. Chuck smiled, that sideways grin of his, and leaned into the mic to say something, but the speakers crackled and I couldn't make it out. Then he raised his guitar, pressed his pick, that dark red pick he'd used for years, edges worn smooth, against the strings, and was just about to kick into the next song when something moved at the front of the stage. The guy in the blue shirt had put down his beer, and he was running. Security wasn't what it is today. Back then, there were just 3 steps and a few feet of empty space between the stage and the audience. The guy covered that distance in seconds, took the steps 2 at a time, and suddenly he was standing right next to Chuck Berry. The crowd held its breath for a moment. I straightened up behind the bar to see what would happen. Big Lenny, our doorman, instinctively lunged forward, but Chuck raised his hand slightly, a gesture that said, "Stop." Big Lenny froze. Chuck looked at the guy. The guy was out of breath, chest heaving, and up close you could see just how young he really was. Maybe 23, maybe 24. His cheekbones were slick with sweat, and there was that strange mix in his eyes, fear and determination all at once. Nobody did this. Jump on stage and stand next to Chuck Berry? Madness. But the guy wasn't crazy. You could tell. He just looked like he couldn't wait anymore. Chuck pulled the mic aside and asked something quietly. I couldn't hear it, but I read his lips. "What do you want?" The guy answered, said something, his hands trembling, and then Chuck Berry laughed. A real laugh, not a stage performance. His shoulders shook and he shook his head side to side. Then he turned back to the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice that gravelly sand-colored tone, "looks like we got ourselves a guest tonight." The crowd roared back. Some were shouting, some were whistling, but most were just watching with curiosity. Chuck turned to the guy and said something else. The guy nodded. Then Chuck reached out, placed his hand on the guy's shoulder, light but firm, and pushed him toward the microphone. The guy grabbed the mic. His hands were shaking. You could see it even from the stage. His fingers slipped on the body of the mic, and for a second, I thought no sound would come out. The crowd waited. Chuck waited. I didn't even notice I'd set down the glass I was holding. Then the guy closed his eyes, just for a second, maybe 2, and opened his mouth. He started to sing. It was Maybellene, one of Chuck's classics, a song everybody knew, but the guy sang it different. His voice wasn't perfect, wasn't professional, but there was something in it, something raw, something genuine. He wasn't swallowing the words, wasn't rushing, and most importantly, he wasn't trying to imitate Chuck Berry. It was his own voice, his own interpretation. The crowd was stunned for a moment, then someone started clapping, and applause is contagious, you all know that. Within seconds, everyone was keeping time. I was watching Chuck's face. He wasn't laughing anymore. There was no smile. He was just listening, brow slightly furrowed, head tilted slightly to one side, and that dark red pick still turning between his fingers. He was sizing the guy up, weighing every note, and I recognized that expression. The way musicians evaluate each other. The stage lights hit the guy's face, sweat running down his temples, and he, as if unaware of anything, was focused only on the song. When the song ended, there was silence. A brief silence, maybe 3 seconds, but on stage 3 seconds feels like a lifetime. Then the crowd exploded. A real explosion, applause and screams and whistles, and the guy, for the first time, opened his eyes and looked around, like he'd just woken from a dream, like he'd forgotten where he was until that very moment. Chuck walked over to him. "I heard what he said this time because he said it into the mic. You play guitar?" The guy paused for a beat. The crowd was still noisy but quieting down. Everyone wanted to hear the answer. The guy licked his lips, sweat, nerves, I don't know, and nodded. "Yeah," he said, his voice cracking through the mic. "I play." Chuck looked at him. It was a long look, assessing, weighing, deciding. Then, and nobody expected this, I didn't expect it, Big Lenny didn't expect it, the crowd sure as hell didn't expect it, Chuck Berry slipped the strap of his guitar off his shoulder. His Gibson ES 350T, that legendary instrument, the symbol of his 63-year career, and held it out to the guy. "One more song," Chuck said. "With me." The crowd lost its mind. The guy stared at the guitar. He reached out, then pulled back, like he was afraid to touch it. Chuck waited patiently. And then, the guy took it. His fingers traveled over the body, gripped the neck, slipped the strap over his shoulder. He felt the weight of the guitar. His hands had stopped shaking. The effect of holding the right instrument. I knew about that too. I'd seen people change when they got the right instrument in their hands. The tension would leave, the fear would leave, and only the music remained. That's what happened to this guy. His shoulders relaxed, his posture changed, and there was no more fear in his eyes. He was just ready. Chuck grabbed the backup guitar from the side of the stage, a simpler model, but it sounded good, and tested a few chords. Then he turned to the drummer and bassist, said something. They nodded. The guy waited, fingers hovering over the strings. Chuck leaned into the mic. "Johnny B. Goode," he said. That was all. And they started. Chuck played the opening riff, that famous intro, one of the most recognizable guitar intros in history, and the guy listened. Just listened, maybe counting, maybe catching the rhythm, and then, on the second cycle, he jumped in. And he was good. Not perfect, no. He missed some notes, there were some delays on the transitions, but he'd caught the spirit of the song, the spirit of rock and roll. Chuck looked at him and smiled. It was a real smile, not a stage thing. And I, with my 30 years of bar experience, knew what that smile meant. Approval. Acceptance. "Okay," that smile said. "I see you." I don't know if the guy saw the smile. Probably not. His eyes were on the fretboard, his fingers on the strings. But he must have felt something because his playing changed. It got bolder, freer. When they reached the solo, Chuck stepped back. He gave the solo to the guy. The crowd was shocked for a moment. Chuck Berry doesn't give up a solo, everybody knows that. But the guy didn't hesitate. He dug his fingers into the strings and started playing. It wasn't a perfect solo. Technically, maybe it was average. But there was something in it, something raw and naked, and that something spread to every corner of the room. The song lasted 6 minutes. The normal version was 3 minutes, but that night it lasted 6. Chuck stretched it out. The guy stretched it out. They responded to each other's music. And the crowd went crazy. Applause was mixing into the song. Feet keeping time were shaking the wooden floor, and I realized I was still holding the glass. My fingerprints pressed into the condensation. Then the song ended. There are endings that fade away quietly, that melt slowly. This wasn't one of those. Chuck hit the final chord, the guy followed, and then silence. Absolute silence. 1 second, 2 seconds, then the explosion. The crowd was on its feet, chairs toppling over, people shouting, people crying. Yes, crying, I'm not exaggerating. And the guy stood in the middle of the stage, Chuck's guitar still over his shoulder, trembling. But it was a different kind of trembling. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't exhaustion. He trembled like something had passed through him, like something had pierced right through him, and his His eyes were wet. Chuck walked over to him. He took the guitar, slipped off the strap, but he didn't step away right away. He said something to the guy, something nobody else could hear, and the guy nodded. Then Chuck reached into his pocket and pulled out the dark red pick, the one he'd used for years, edges worn smooth, companion to countless songs. He placed it in the guy's palm. His fingers lingered over the guy's fingers for a moment, then pulled away. The guy looked down at the pick, that small piece of plastic in his palm. Chuck turned back to the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "you just witnessed a 5-minute legend." The crowd erupted one last time. The guy came down from the stage. He descended the steps one by one slowly, and the crowd parted for him. People patted his back, said things to him, but the guy wasn't looking at anyone. He walked straight to the bar, my side. He sat on the stool in front of the counter and buried his face in his hands. He was crying. It was a quiet, shaky cry, his shoulders heaving. I didn't know what to say. I put a whiskey in front of him, on the house, and waited. After a while, the guy lowered his hands. His face was beet red, his eyes were swollen, but he was smiling. A strange, broken smile. "Thanks," he said. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I know," he said. "Just thanks." He downed the whiskey in one shot. Then he opened his palm and looked at the pick. His fingers traced its surface, felt the worn edges, and he said something, so quiet I almost didn't hear. "Did that really happen?" I asked his name. He wouldn't say. I asked where he was from. "Down south," he said. That was all. "Are you a musician?" I asked. He shook his head. "No," he said. "Never was. He paused. "I just wanted to live it once." That night, he sat there until the club closed. Chuck played another song, 2 more songs, then the night was over. The crowd thinned out. The lights went off. The guy got up from his stool, looked at me one last time, and walked toward the door. That pick was still in his palm. Then he vanished. He melted into the Memphis night, his silhouette dissolving into the darkness, and I never saw him again. I didn't know his name. I didn't know where he came from. I never learned where he went. But I never forgot that night. After Chuck came down from the stage, he walked over to the bar. He was tired, sweaty, but there was a glint in his eyes. "Whiskey," he said, and I poured. While he drank, he looked at me. "You see that?" he said. "I saw it," I said. "What did you see?" I thought for a moment. "A 5-minute legend," I finally said. Chuck laughed. "No," he said. "You saw more than that." "What?" "You saw a man find himself." He finished his whiskey, set the glass on the counter, and walked toward the door. But halfway there, he stopped. He turned. He looked at me. "Some people," he said, "spend a whole lifetime searching for those 5 minutes. That stage, that moment, and they never find it. That kid found it." He paused. And he was smart. He didn't ask for more. "What do you mean?" "If he'd asked for more," Chuck said, "that moment would have died. Now it's going to live forever." Then he walked out. Years went by. The Blue Note closed, reopened, changed hands, eventually got torn down. I worked other bars, then retired. Chuck Berry kept on touring. His legend kept growing. He died in 2017, and the whole world mourned. But that night, August 17, 1963, stayed etched in my memory. In 2019, something happened. I was visiting an old record shop in Memphis, nostalgia, and I saw something in the display case. A framed pick, dark red, worn edges, a small note underneath. Chuck Berry's pick, 1963, anonymous donation from a private collection. I asked the owner about it. "Anonymous donation," he said. Came with a letter. It said, "For anyone who ever wanted to be a star, even if only for 5 minutes." I looked at the pick. Behind the glass, inside the case, a 56-year-old memory. And that guy, the one in the blue shirt, trembling, scared and brave, must have written that letter. He must have kept that pick for the rest of his life, and then he must have decided to let it go, so others could feel it too. What happened that night at the Blue Note? Some folks would say nothing much. A fan jumped on stage, sang a song, played a song, left. It didn't make the papers. It didn't end up in history books. The guy never got famous. Memphis put out an album, never performed on another stage, as far as I know. It was just 5 minutes. But sometimes I think about it. I think about how 5 minutes can be worth a lifetime. I think about how that guy carried that night with him for the rest of his days. I think about how on every bad day, every hard moment, he'd close his eyes and go back to that stage. Feel the weight of Chuck Berry's guitar on his shoulder, hear the crowd's applause in his ears, and smile. Because he'd lived it. Even if only for 5 minutes, he'd lived it. Music still plays on the streets of Memphis. On Beale Street, the bars are open. Guitars are wailing. Young people are climbing onto stages chasing their dreams. Some of them make it. Most of them don't. But every once in a while, very rarely, someone jumps on stage. Without permission, without an invitation, filled with fear and hope. And in that moment, right in that moment, the spirit of 1963 comes back. Because rock and roll never dies. It just waits for a new stage. That record shop is still open today. In its display case, the dark red pick still sits there. Edges worn, color slightly faded, but there. And every day, dozens of people walk past it. Most don't notice. But sometimes, someone stops, steps closer to the glass, looks at the pick, and maybe, just maybe, they feel that night. A man who jumped on stage, hands trembling as they gripped the microphone, Chuck Berry's smile, a 6-minute song. And then, only then, a pick placed into an open palm, the remnant of a 5-minute legend. I'm 83 years old now. My eyes don't see like they used to. My ears don't hear like they used to. But that night, August 17th, 1963, I remember like it was yesterday. The flickering bulb, the sweat-soaked air, Chuck Berry's sideways grin, and the light in that blue-shirted guy's eyes. That light never went out. It never will, because some stories don't disappear. They just pass on to someone else. And maybe today, maybe right now, somewhere out there, a young kid is walking past a club, a few bucks in his pocket, a song in his heart. He's looking at the door, hesitating, and then he walks in, one step closer to the stage. That's how rock and roll keeps going. One step, one song, one night, 5 minutes, lights fade,